Sometime in the first week of January 2020, a member of the Sussex's small household staff at Frogmore Cottage noticed something unusual in the study. The printer had been running. Pages lay stacked on the desk. Not correspondence, not invitations, but what appeared to be a draft statement, a carefully worded announcement. The language was polished, almost legalistic, and it spoke of stepping back from senior royal duties, of splitting time between the United Kingdom and North America, of financial independence. The staff member did not read the entire document. They did not need to. The tone was unmistakable. This was not a negotiating position. This was a departure notice. And it had been written not by a press secretary, not by a legal team, but apparently by the couple themselves, on their own laptop, in their own home, without informing the palace. The Queen had not seen it. The Prince of Wales had not seen it. The private secretaries, whose entire professional existence revolved around managing exactly this kind of announcement, they had not seen it. What that staff member encountered on the desk at Frogmore was, in effect, a resignation letter drafted in secret by two members of the most observed family on earth. And the fact that it existed at all tells you everything about what had been building inside that cottage for months. The arguments, the frustrations, the late-night conversations that bled into early mornings, the sense, shared between husband and wife, but experienced differently by each, that the institution they served was either unwilling or unable to protect them, and that the only rational response was to leave before it consumed them entirely. The story of Harry and Meghan's departure from royal life has been told many times, from many angles. It has been framed as a love story, a betrayal, a liberation, a tragedy, a tantrum, a revolution. But the version that matters most, the one that explains why it happened, when it happened, and why it happened the way it did, is the version that lives in the small hours of the night, in the rooms where staff could hear raised voices through closed doors, where the couple wrestled not just with the palace, but with each other over what leaving would actually cost. To understand the weight of what was decided in those rooms, you have to understand the architecture of the life they were leaving. The British royal family is not merely a family, it is a firm, the word the royals themselves use. And like any firm, it operates on hierarchy, precedent, and an unspoken understanding that individual desire is subordinate to institutional survival. When Prince Harry was born in September 1984, his role was already defined. He was the spare, the second son. His purpose, in the cold calculus of monarchy, was to serve as insurance for the line of succession and, beyond that, to support the crown through public service. He would open hospitals, tour Commonwealth nations, patron charities, and wave from balconies. He would do this for the rest of his life. In exchange, he would receive housing, security, an income from the Duchy of Cornwall via his father, and a degree of public affection that came with being the younger, more approachable prince. It was a contract he never signed, but was born into. And for most of his life, he honored it. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He created the Invictus Games. He became, by most public polling, the most popular member of the royal family after the Queen herself. He did all of this while carrying private wounds that would not become fully public until years later. The death of his mother when he was 12, the long untreated grief, the substance use, the panic attacks, the sense of being watched and hunted by the same press that had chased Diana's car into a Paris tunnel. When Meghan Markle entered this picture, she entered it as an outsider in nearly every sense the word can carry. She was American. She was biracial. She was divorced. She was an actress, a profession the British establishment has never quite known how to categorize. She was self-made in a system that does not value self-making. And she was, by every account from those early days, genuinely in love with a man who seemed, for the first time in years, genuinely happy. Their courtship was swift and mostly secret. Their engagement, announced in November 2017, was greeted with enormous public enthusiasm. The wedding at Windsor in May 2018 drew a global audience of nearly 2 billion viewers. For a brief window, weeks, perhaps a few months, the narrative was simple and appealing. A modern prince had found a modern bride. The monarchy was evolving. But the institution Meghan married into was not designed for evolution. It was designed for continuity. And continuity, in practice, meant a set of expectations that were rarely spoken aloud, but ruthlessly enforced. You did not outshine the future king and queen. You did not pursue your own projects without palace approval. You did not speak to the press without coordination through the royal ratchet, the informal communication chain that ran from private secretary to press secretary to favoured royal correspondent. You did not, under any circumstances, surprise the Queen. These were not rules written in any handbook. They were conventions, absorbed over decades by those born into the system. Meghan had not been born into the system. She had been a working professional in Los Angeles. She had run her own lifestyle blog. She had navigated Hollywood, which is its own kind of ruthless hierarchy, but operates on fundamentally different principles. Visibility is currency, self-promotion is survival, and silence is death. The collision between these two worlds was not merely cultural, it was structural. And the first cracks appeared far earlier than most people realize. The autumn of 2018 brought the first reports of internal tension, and those reports carried a specific charge. During preparations for the wedding, according to multiple sources who later spoke on and off the record, a fitting session for the bridesmaids' dresses became a flashpoint. Princess Charlotte, then 3 years old, was among the bridesmaids. The setup was routine, a fitting at Kensington Palace, overseen by staff, with Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, present. The event itself was minor, a disagreement over whether the dresses required tights, whether the fit was correct, whether adjustments could be made in time. The witnesses were limited to palace staff and the two duchesses themselves. But the reaction was disproportionate to the dispute. Someone briefed the press. The story that emerged, first in the Daily Telegraph, then everywhere, was that Meghan had made Kate cry. The revelation that mattered, though, came years later, when Meghan told Oprah Winfrey that the reverse was true. Kate had made her cry. What actually happened in that fitting room remains disputed. But what is not disputed is what the episode revealed about the information ecosystem surrounding the royal family. That private moments became public weapons, and that Meghan was consistently on the losing end of that exchange. By late 2018, the couple's relationship with the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge had cooled visibly. The setup was a shared office at Kensington Palace, the so-called Fab Four arrangement, where both couples' households operated under one roof with a single communications team. The event that fractured it was less a single incident than an accumulation. Staff reported that working styles clashed. Meghan sent emails at 5 in the morning. She expected rapid responses. She used language that some staff interpreted as demanding, others as simply direct. Witnesses within the household described an atmosphere of mounting strain, not hostility, but a persistent mismatch of expectations. The reaction from the Cambridges' side, according to reporting by Valentine Lowe and Robert Lacey, was to accelerate the separation of households. Harry and Meghan would get their own office, their own staff, their own press operation. The revelation buried in this administrative reshuffling was that the split was not, as publicly framed, a natural maturation of two growing households. It was a divorce, professional, deliberate, and driven by a breakdown in trust that would never fully heal. In early 2019, the Sussexes moved from Kensington Palace to Frogmore Cottage in Windsor. The setup appeared positive, a family home, newly renovated, away from the fishbowl of London. The event that shadowed the move was the public reaction to the renovation costs, reported at £2.4 million of taxpayer money. Witnesses in the press corps seized on every detail: the yoga studio, the copper bathtub, the organic paint. The reaction from the couple was frustration that bordered on despair. They had not chosen the property. The sovereign grant covered official residences as a matter of course. But the framing in the tabloids was of extravagance, entitlement, tone deafness. The revelation was not about a bathtub, it was about a pattern. Every choice the Sussexes made was being filtered through a lens of suspicion, and the institution that should have defended them, the palace communications apparatus, was either unable or unwilling to push back. The spring of 2019 brought Archie's birth, and with it, a decision that would become one of the most scrutinised of the Sussexes' royal tenure. The setup was the announcement of the birth itself, or rather, the lack of one. Traditionally, royal births are communicated through a bulletin placed on an easel outside Buckingham Palace, accompanied by a photo call on the hospital steps. The event was Harry and Meghan's choice to forego this ritual, opting instead for a private birth at an undisclosed location, followed by a brief photo session 2 days later. Witnesses in the Royal Ratchet, the network of correspondents accustomed to access, were furious. The reaction was a wave of hostile coverage framed as secrecy, as ingratitude, as a violation of the implicit bargain between royals and press. The revelation was that the couple had made a parenting choice, a choice to protect the first hours of their son's life from cameras, and the system had punished them for it, treating privacy as an act of war. That summer, the Sussexes launched their own Instagram account, which gained 1 million followers in under 6 hours. The setup was strategic, a direct channel to the public that bypassed traditional media. The event was the account's immediate and enormous success, which made it not just a communications tool, but a source of institutional anxiety. Witnesses within the palace noted that the account's engagement metrics dwarfed those of the official royal family channels. The reaction from senior aides, according to multiple accounts, was concern that the Sussexes were building a parallel brand. The revelation was straightforward. Harry and Meghan had demonstrated that they did not need the institution's media infrastructure to reach an audience, and that realization frightened people whose power depended on being gatekeepers. In September 2019, the couple embarked on a tour of southern Africa. The setup was a 10-day visit, the kind of high-profile Commonwealth engagement that is the bread and butter of royal public service. The event that defined the tour, however, was not a ribbon-cutting or a hospital visit. It was an interview. ITV journalist Tom Bradby, a long-time contact of Harry's, sat down with Meghan in Johannesburg and asked a simple question about how she was doing. Witnesses, the camera crew, the production team, watched as Meghan's composure broke. She said that she was not okay, that no one had asked her that she was struggling. The reaction was seismic. The tabloids split between sympathy and skepticism. Senior royals, by multiple accounts, were alarmed not by the content, but by the forum. She had spoken publicly about private pain without clearance. The revelation was that the interview was not a breakdown, but a signal. Meghan was telling anyone who would listen that she was drowning, and the institution's primary concern was that she had said it on camera. In the same documentary, Harry made his own disclosure. The setup was another Bradby interview. This one focused on Harry's relationship with his brother. The event was Harry's admission that he and William were on different paths, a choice of words so careful it practically trembled with restraint. Witnesses to the fallout included staff at both Kensington Palace and Clarence House, who reported that the remark detonated like a quiet bomb. The reaction from William's camp, according to Robert Lacey's reporting, was a mixture of hurt and anger, the sense that a private family matter had been weaponized for public sympathy. The revelation was that the rift between the brothers was no longer subtext. It was text. And Harry, by speaking it aloud, had crossed a line that the royal family's survival depends on maintaining. The line between what the public sees and what actually happens. The autumn of 2019 saw the Sussexes' legal offensive begin. The setup was the announcement that Harry and Meghan were suing several British tabloids. The Mail on Sunday, for publishing a private letter Meghan had written to her father, the owners of The Sun and The Mirror for alleged phone hacking. The event was the statement Harry released alongside the legal filings, a raw and furious document that compared the press treatment of Meghan to the treatment of his mother. Witnesses in the media industry described the statement as unprecedented, not for its content, which was arguably justified, but for its tone, which broke every convention of royal restraint. The reaction from the palace was, publicly, silence. Privately, according to multiple sources, it was alarm. The Sussexes had not consulted senior royals before launching legal action that would inevitably generate months of hostile coverage. The revelation was that Harry was no longer operating within the system's rules. He was operating on his own moral compass, and that compass was pointing away from the institution. By December 2019, the pressure had become unbearable. The setup was the Christmas period, traditionally spent at Sandringham with the Queen. The entire family gathered for church on Christmas morning, the walk past photographers, the performance of unity. The event was the Sussexes' decision not to attend. They spent Christmas in Canada, on Vancouver Island, in a borrowed waterfront mansion. Witnesses included Canadian security personnel and local residents who spotted the couple in nearby Victoria. The reaction from the British press was predictable. Absence was framed as rejection, as a snub to the Queen, as evidence of Meghan's malign influence. The revelation, understood only in retrospect, was that the Canadian retreat was not a holiday. It was a rehearsal. They were testing what life outside the institution would feel like, and they were doing it with the quiet assistance of a small team that had already begun exploring options for financial independence, security arrangements, and a base of operations in North America. What happened inside Frogmore Cottage in the days before the announcement remains partially obscured, but the outlines have been established through multiple sources, including staff accounts, Harry's own memoir, and reporting by journalists with access to palace insiders. The setup was a return from Canada in early January, a house that felt temporary, a couple who had already made their emotional decision but had not yet resolved the logistics. The event was a series of arguments, not between Harry and Meghan as adversaries, but between them as partners who agreed on the destination and disagreed violently on the route. Witnesses among the household staff at Frogmore reported hearing raised voices late at night. Not the content, in most cases, but the tone and the duration. One source described it as hours of it, going back and forth. The reaction within the cottage was exhaustion. The question was not whether to leave, that was settled, but how much to burn on the way out. A clean break or a negotiated withdrawal, a statement or a conversation. Meghan, by Harry's own account, wanted clarity, speed, and control of the narrative. Harry wanted to give his grandmother a chance to respond before anything went public. The revelation is that the final argument was not about whether to go, it was about whether to warn the family or simply present them with a fait accompli. In the end, they chose something between the two, and it satisfied no one. On the 6th of January, Harry spoke with his father by phone. The setup was an attempt to arrange a face-to-face meeting to discuss the couple's plans. The event was Charles's response. According to Harry's memoir, the Prince of Wales said he would need time to consider the request and suggested putting the details in writing. Witnesses to this conversation were limited, but Harry later described the exchange as deflecting, a pattern he recognized from childhood. The reaction from Harry was frustration bordering on panic. He feared that delay meant the palace would leak the plans before the couple could control the announcement. The revelation was that the institution's default mode, caution, process, consultation, was fundamentally incompatible with the urgency Harry and Meghan felt. To the palace, process was protection. To the Sussexes, it was a trap. On the 8th of January 2020, the statement went live. The setup was a post on the Sussex Royal Instagram account at 6:30 in the evening, time to land after the evening news cycle had begun, but before it closed. The event was the publication of a carefully worded announcement that the couple intended to step back as senior members of the royal family and work to become financially independent. Witnesses at Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Kensington Palace later described the moment the statement appeared as a shock, not because the content was entirely unexpected, but because it had been published without final approval. The reaction was immediate and institutional. A palace spokesperson released a terse statement acknowledging the announcement and noting that discussions with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are at an early stage. The revelation embedded in that single line was devastating. Discussions were at an early stage. The family had not agreed. The Queen had not been consulted on the timing. The Sussexes had, in institutional terms, gone rogue. The next 72 hours were chaos managed in whispers. The setup was a media firestorm that touched every front page in the English-speaking world, and most beyond. The event was the Sandringham Summit of January 13th, a meeting convened by the Queen at her Norfolk estate, attended by Charles, William, and Harry, with Meghan joining by phone from Canada. Witnesses were restricted to the principals and a handful of senior advisers. The reaction, as described by multiple sources, was businesslike and bleak. The Queen set the terms. There would be a 12-month review. Harry and Meghan would lose their HRH styles in practice. They would repay the Frogmore renovation costs. they would no longer represent the Queen. The revelation was that the Queen, often characterized as passive or sentimental in family matters, had moved with decisive speed. The transition period she imposed was not a compromise. It was an exit process. She had accepted their decision and was managing the consequences, not the emotions. In February, Meghan made her final public appearances as a senior royal. The setup was a series of engagements in London, the Endeavour Fund Awards, the Mountbatten Festival of Music, the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey. The event that crystallised the mood was the Commonwealth Day service, where the Sussexes arrived separately from the Cambridges, were seated in the second row rather than the first, and exchanged greetings so perfunctory they appeared rehearsed. Witnesses in the Abbey described the atmosphere as funereal. The reaction from commentators was to treat the body language as a text. Every averted gaze, every stiff smile became evidence for whatever narrative the observer preferred. The revelation was simpler and sadder. Two brothers who had once walked together behind their mother's coffin now could not look at each other across a church aisle. Whatever the merits of the argument, whatever the justification for leaving, this was the cost, and it was written on their faces. By March 2020, as the pandemic locked down the world, Harry and Meghan had relocated to Los Angeles. The setup was a move initially to a property lent by Tyler Perry, then to a permanent home in Montecito, California. The event was the signing of deals with Netflix and Spotify, estimated at over $100 million combined. Witnesses in the entertainment industry noted the speed with which the Sussexes pivoted from royal duties to commercial partnerships. The reaction in Britain was a mixture of fascination and disgust. The accusation, never quite spoken but always implied, was that they had traded duty for dollars. The revelation, when you strip away the moralizing, was that the Sussexes had done exactly what they said they would do. They had become financially independent. The institution that had sustained them was no longer their patron, and they owed it nothing except the debt of renovation costs, which they repaid within months. The Oprah interview of March 2021 was, in structural terms, the detonation that the departure had made inevitable. The setup was 2 hours of prime-time American television, an audience of over 17 million, a global reach of tens of millions more. The event was a series of disclosures that ranged from the personal to the institutional. Meghan's suicidal ideation, the refusal of the palace to provide mental health support, the unnamed family member who expressed concern about the potential skin colour of Harry and Meghan's unborn child. Witnesses were, in this case, the entire watching world. The reaction was bifurcated along geographic and generational lines. In America, sympathy was overwhelming. In Britain, skepticism dominated. The revelation was not any single claim, but the cumulative weight of them. Whether you believed every detail or questioned the framing, the portrait that emerged was of an institution that had failed two of its members in ways that were, at minimum, callous and, at maximum, cruel. The question that remains after the interviews and the memoir and the Netflix series and the legal battles and the public statements and the private grief is not whether Harry and Meghan were right to leave. That is a moral judgment, and moral judgments depend on the values of the person making them. The question that is more useful, more revealing, is why the institution could not accommodate them. The answer lies in the nature of monarchy itself. A constitutional monarchy survives not through power, but through consensus, a shared agreement renewed daily, that this particular family deserves its position not because of what it does, but because of what it represents. Stability, continuity, the suppression of individual desire in service of collective identity. Every monarch, every consort, every prince and princess who has successfully navigated this system has done so by accepting a fundamental bargain, that you surrender your private self in exchange for your public role. The Queen understood this. She embodied it for 70 years. Charles understood it even as he chafed against it. William understood it, perhaps more instinctively than any of them. Harry understood it too. He simply decided, in the end, that the bargain was not worth the price. Meghan's role in this decision has been endlessly debated and frequently caricatured. She has been cast as the architect of the departure, the American interloper who lured a vulnerable prince away from his duty. This framing is both reductive and revealing. Reductive because it strips Harry of his own agency. Revealing because it exposes the assumptions embedded in the institution's worldview. The idea that a woman, an outsider, a person of colour, could look at the monarchy and find it wanting, this was, for many defenders of the institution, not just wrong, but incomprehensible. The system was the system. You adapted to it. It did not adapt to you. But systems that cannot adapt do not survive. They calcify. They lose relevance. They become museums of themselves. The departure of Harry and Meghan did not cause a crisis in the monarchy. It revealed one, a crisis of flexibility, of empathy, of willingness to examine whether the old bargain still holds in a world that no longer automatically defers to inherited status. The monarchy will survive. It has survived civil wars, abdications, and scandals far worse than a couple moving to California. But it will survive only if it learns something from this episode beyond the tactical lesson of controlling the narrative. It must learn that the people inside the institution are not components of a machine. They are human beings. And human beings, when they are ignored and unprotected and told that their pain is less important than the schedule, will eventually walk out the door. If this account has been useful to you, subscribing to the channel costs nothing, and there are more stories like this one already in progress. We approach these subjects the same way every time, with evidence first, interpretation second, and respect for the complexity of lives lived under extraordinary pressure. The bell notification means you will see new episodes when they are published, rather than relying on the algorithm to surface them weeks later. We do not do clickbait. We do not do hot takes. We tell the story as completely as the evidence allows and let you draw your own conclusions. That approach only works if there is an audience for it, and your subscription is how we know that audience exists. There is a reason you watch this far. If the reason is that you value careful, sourced, unhurried storytelling about the people and institutions that shape the world we live in, then this channel was built for you. More episodes are coming. The next one examines another royal household, another moment where private reality collided with public expectation, and the fallout that followed. You will not want to miss it. The printer at Frogmore Cottage ran sometime in the first week of January 2020, and the pages it produced contained a statement that would fracture a family and reshape a monarchy. But the statement was not the story. The story was the months that preceded it, the arguments that staff heard through walls, the slow accumulation of grievances that no one in authority took seriously enough, the dawning realization by two people that the institution they had pledged to serve would not extend to them the basic protections it owed. Harry did not leave because Meghan told him to. He left because the life he was living had become, in his own words, a trap. She did not drag him away from his family. She showed him that another life was possible, and once he saw it, he could not unsee it. The night they made the final decision, the night the voices carried through the corridors of Frogmore, and the staff knew, without being told, that something irreversible was happening, was not the beginning of the end. The end had begun years earlier, in fitting rooms and newsrooms and private offices where people who should have known better chose convenience over conscience. The printer merely gave it a form. The pages it produced were not a declaration of war. They were a white flag, the surrender of two people who had tried to make an old system work and discovered, painfully and publicly, that the system was not interested in working for them. What remains now is the silence between brothers, the distance between continents, and the question that will outlast all of them: whether the crown can learn to hold its people as tightly as it holds its traditions. The evidence, so far, is not encouraging.